Hello everyone and welcome to my Age of Mythology Retold Immortal Pillars unit tier list for the Chinese faction. So this is going to be based on probably about 25-ish hours that I've put into the Chinese faction thus far. I've done mostly the campaign, and on the campaign I've completed the all of the missions on both Titan and Ludicrous. I've also done a couple of Ludicrous challenges, which includes killing all enemies before certain timers expire. So I feel like I have a pretty good understanding of this Chinese faction, how all of the units play. I have used all of the units in various different ways. I've used all of the heroes in various different ways. And I have to say, I am very impressed with the Chinese faction. I think all of their units are quite fun and unique. They all have their own sort of gimmicks and really well designed units, if not some of them being slightly overpowered, but we will discuss those as we get to each unit. As I say, it's all kind of based on about 25 to 30-ish hours I've put into the game since launch, and as I say, I think it's overall the overall set of units are very diverse and quite powerful, honestly, in many ways. I think there will probably be quite a lot of balance changes as this game and DLC gains maturity. Probably because it needs to, especially against some of the other factions. But anywho, let's not waste any more time. I'll jump in, I'll discuss each unit, why I've put them, where I've put them. And also in the background you guys will probably be seeing some of the gameplay footage throughout my experience of the campaign. So, let's start with, I guess we should start with the villager. So let's start with the villager first off. B tier. It's just a very generic unit. You need it. You can't have an empire without one. They build, they gather, they do everything you want them to do. But they're also just a villager. So it is what it is. I'm not going to spend too much time talking about them, just because they're the same villager as every other villager in Age of Mythology for the most part. The next unit is a unique unit to the Chinese faction. I'm talking about the Kwafu, which is a giant gatherer. Now these things are basically an improved version of the dwarf from the Norse faction. Basically does everything a dwarf does but better. They build buildings faster, they gather more resources, they can carry more, they gather wood and gold specifically at one hell of a rate. And yeah, they are tankier, healthier, do more damage. They are actual technical fighters as well. They can do damage against buildings. I mean, the list goes on. These are insanely powerful units. The only downside is they're quite expensive and they have 3 population cost. So, yeah, okay, you can't just make these indefinitely. But they are really, really good units. I highly recommend getting at least a couple of those. I believe they are unique to Nuwa as a god. As is the next unit I'm about to discuss, which is the Hero Kwafu. Basically, everything that a Kwafu does, but better. Build faster, gather more resources, gather rate improved, number of resources held and deposited improved. I mean, this thing is insane. Oh, and it does a ridiculous amount of damage to myth units too. So, basically, it is your... I normally have it as either a gatherer, and then have 1 or 2 Kwafu just running around building walls and building buildings, because that is honestly what they are so good at. It really speeds up the... or reduces the time it takes to get your infrastructure and eco up and running. But you can only build 1 of them. That's the only drawback. But, I mean, 1 is more than enough, to be honest. They are so good. And they're really cheap. I think they cost like 100 gold. The only other problem with these Kwafus is they cost 17 favor a pop. So you kind of have to make a choice whether you want to get eco or myth units, because you can't... It's the way that the Chinese faction gains favor, which probably goes a little bit beyond the topic of unit tier list, but I'll briefly explain it. by having as many buildings connected to create as much favored land as possible. It is a relatively slow experience, especially compared to like the Norse as an example. So you kind of have to choose your favor quite wisely. So if you're just banging out Quafus, you're not going to have any favor for anything else. But they are really strong units, so you definitely want a couple of them for sure. Next unit, the Ox Cart. I mean, let's be honest, it's the standard market trading unit. I can't really put it above D tier. It serves its purpose. It's good at its job. It has only one job. It's very one-dimensional, and it does its job as well as any other marketplace trader. So D tier, it is what it is. Next up, we have the first of the unique Chinese warrior units, which is the Dao Swordsman. It is technically an all-rounder. Relatively okay at tanking, relatively healthy, decent damage against most things, but honestly they are very easily replaced with just about every other unit in the Chinese faction. And the reason I say that, as good as they are at being an all-rounder, they're kind of not particularly great. They're like the jack of all trades, right? They're good at everything but master at nothing. They're just not that great. Every other unit has its specialties, and when you combine those specialties, you do not need a Dao Swordsman, really. They are pretty much used purely as a little bit of defense in Age 1 and 2. Beyond that, I very rarely use them because I just don't rate them that much, to be honest. So yeah, moving on. We've got the Halberdier, which is essentially the counter cavalry unit from the Atlantean faction. I'm actually going to place it ahead of the Dao Swordsman, even though technically a Dao Swordsman would win in a 1v1 versus a Halberdier. But the Halberdier is very effective at taking down cavalry, and given how powerful the Chinese cavalry are in this game, you definitely want a couple of these in your army, especially if you're fighting the Chinese. But aside from that, they are very, very weak. They are very much a one-dimensional, one-trick pony, good at killing cavalry, useless at everything else. Utterly useless. In fact, I wouldn't even put them in my army just to tank. I would, I'd rather have Javelineers to tank than I would these things. Talking of, so we've got the Wuzu Javelineers next. They are very good units. I have to be honest. I think they are... I think they are up there as being one of the best counter-ranged units in the game, because they are extraordinarily effective at taking down ranged units. They're actually relatively tanky. They've got a decent hit point pool. And they're not even that bad at dealing with everything else as a general soldier. However, they are weak against cavalry for sure. Cavalry is definitely a big weakness of these guys. And to be fair, they will melt against melee units. So if they are on the front lines, they're in the wrong place, positioning wise. So then moving on to the first of one of the most amazing units, just like the most all-rounder unit you can think of, is the Fire Archer. Is it an A tier? I'm going to leave it A tier just for now. But that might come down to a high-end B tier. But this Fire Archer is insane. It has a 3x multiplier against buildings. Check. Or throughout any stage of the game, these things can take down buildings effectively in numbers. They're good against pretty much every unit except cavalry. And even in numbers, that kind of overcomes that challenge. They're pretty cheap, fast to build, obtainable within like Age 1 or Age 2, I think, sorry. Age 2, because you can't build military units in Age 1, but yeah, I mean, these pretty much most of my armies had at least 10 to 20 of these things almost at all points of the game, whether it's Age 2, Age 3, or Age 4. they get better with time. I mean, these things do crazy damage to buildings before even having the fiery upgrade, the burning pitch upgrade, which most archers from other factions require before they can take down buildings. Not these things. They can take them down regardless. They're almost like a mini Medusa in that regard, because their building multiplier is just so high. Yeah, I mean, they're just one of the best all-round archers you can get. Next, we have a bit of a specialist archer, the Chukanu. The Chukanu is a heavy repeating crossbow. It fires, I believe, 6 crossbow bolts in very quick succession before requiring a reload. Granted, the reload does take a little bit of time, so there is a bit of a fire, reload, fire. So there's a weakness in that regard, but these things absolutely melt infantry. They're pretty good at taking down cavalry. The rate at which they fire, and like once they're upgraded, they're actually pretty good at taking down myth units. In fact, they are definitely up there as being one of the best like ranged units that's not a hero in the game. Easily. I mean, axe throwers, I would say, are definitely up there. These things probably better than an axe thrower, generally speaking. Like, you have like 10 of these things and then like just watch the enemy army just melt in front of them. It's kind of funny. But yeah, I guess the limitation is that they are an archer, so they're not unless you've got an army protecting them, they are very weak to anything that's in melee range. So, moving on then to the cavalry units. Now, I think the cavalry units of this faction are kinda busted. I have to be honest, I think they're kinda busted. Specifically the Tiger Cavalry, but we'll come on to that in a moment. The White Horse Cavalry is pretty damn good. It's a tier 3 unit, and basically it's a kind of an all-round cavalry unit. They're tanky, healthy, decent damage, decent against buildings. They have a bow which you can select and fire, which is really good against flying units, myth units, anything with a high health pool. This thing can chunk them down. I mean, you can essentially fire, run, fire, run, fire, run. They're very good at kiting in that regard, and they're melee units as well. So they're kind of good at everything. Are they the best A tier unit? No, but they are very good. They are very good, and they're pretty cheap as well, to be honest. In the grand scheme of things, I would have them in my army over any of the melee units in the Chinese faction, excluding the Tiger Cavalry. Honestly, my army compositions in Age 3 are very much the White Horse Cavalry, the Wuzu Archer, the Fire Archers, the Chukanus, and a couple of Javelineers. That is a tier 3 combination, obviously with a couple of myth units as well, which we'll get onto. Tier 4, you just swap these things with the Tiger Cavalry. Easily one of the best cavalry units in the entire game. And I'm not being dramatic. They are that good. They are healthy. They got really good armor. They are actually quite difficult to take down. If you do manage to kill them, they spawn a infantry unit. A Tiger Cavalry infantry unit that's, again, unique. You can't actually build the unit. You have to lose one of these in order to spawn it. Which is fairly decent in of itself. The damage it does is kind of nuts. They are expensive, granted, but they are worth every single penny. Highly recommend that you swap out your White Horse Cavalry for Tiger Cavalry as soon as you're able to, because they're just better versions in every single way. Aside from the bow, I cannot think of a single reason why you would want White Horse Cavalry over Tiger Cavalry. They're just that good. There's no two ways about it. So then we move on to the siege equipment. So we've got the giant crossbow. This is a unit that is very, very powerful. Really good range. It hits like a truck. And not only is it effective at destroying buildings, it's also effective at destroying high hit point units such as myth units. It's good at taking down boats. As long as they're not left on their own, they're actually pretty damn good. In fact, I'm going to put them there because obviously I think the cavalry are a lot more versatile, but I do think these giant crossbows are very, very good units. I think they're easily one of the best A tier units on this list. Aside from some of the myth units that we'll come on to later. So, the next thing we've got is the Axe Cart, which is a tier 4 siege weapon. I guess it replaces the siege tower. And it does something in the region of 45 slash damage. Which means they're good at killing troops, as well as destroying buildings. They're tanky, good armor, but slow. Kind of worth having one or two of these in your army, but beyond that, yeah, it's definitely worth having one or two of these in your army, I think. But I have a hard time really placing these because I haven't really put a huge amount of game time into using them. They're quite expensive, and I feel like all of these other units here, like the Ballista, the Tiger Cavalry, even the White Horse Cavalry, the Chuckanews, and the Fire Archers, kind of replace any requirement for having this Axe Cart at all in your army. At most, maybe one or two just to do a little bit of the tanking, but that's what myth units are for, so kind of don't need them really, if I'm being honest. So then we move on to the hero units of the Chinese faction. Now, apologies, I haven't... some of these I need to refer to by name because I cannot remember all of their names by heart. But we'll start with one that I do remember the name of, and that's the Pioneer. These are very effective anti-myth units, as you'd expect from a hero. They're pretty cheap, available from Age 2. I would say these are not only effective at killing myth units, but they're also effective scouts. They pick up relics with an upgrade. The Sky Lanterns they build, or they use as an ability, gives you very strong scouting capabilities. These are definitely worth having in your army. They are ranged as well, so they're ranged heroes that you can build an infinite number of times. So you could have 20 of these things and they will absolutely melt myth units like you would not believe. And because they're heroes, because they're ranged units even, you can kite with them. So myth units just cannot get on top of them unless you just leave them on their own and just don't micro them. So yeah, one of the more powerful, I'd say they're kind of a better version of a Hazer to a point. Right, moving on, we've got the Sage. Hot damn, is this unit absolutely busted. So the Sage, you can only build 5 of them, which is, thank Christ, because any more than that, woof, good luck. So they're obviously good against killing myth units anyway, just because they're heroes. They can stun myth units. Not only can they stun myth units, the same ability can summon a mirror image of said myth unit. Those myth units have access to, I think, their abilities and their damage. They do have an expiration date, which is quite short. But you have 5 of these and you go against, I don't know, 5 of the Phoenix type birds. You could actually just create 5 copies of them. And then you got 5. I always get the names wrong of these things. I call them Phoenix. I really shouldn't. Zukus, I believe they're called. No idea if that's how they're pronounced, but that's what they're on paper written like. Even if the Qinglongs, these things, I mean, you can literally summon copies of those. And then you got a bunch of Qinglongs in your army that you didn't have before. It's kind of like, okay. Kind of punishes your enemy for building myth units. Oh, and they can heal. Not only can they heal single targets, they can heal groups of units. So kind of like an aura around the target gets healed as well. So you've got 5 healers that you can have within your army, as well as everything else that it does. Kind of just insane. It's an all-rounder. It's just an absolutely fantastic unit. You have access to 5, build 5. They're not even that expensive. I think it's like 100 gold or something. Yeah, brilliant. Incredible units. Oh, and they do a ton of damage versus buildings too. Because reasons. I don't know. I don't know why. I think they do divine damage. Kind of like a priest in that regard. And they're ranged. Just to add that to the mix as well. Alright, so now we have a bit of an interesting hero unit in Najar. Now, Najar is... Do you know what? I actually don't use him that much. But he's available from Age 2. And then you get an upgraded version in Age 3 and Age 4. You don't have to pay to upgrade him. I think it's just he upgrades with the times. And you basically start in Age 2 with a child version of Najar. Then you get like a younger Najar. And then you get like a mature Najar. He has some interesting abilities. So his weapon can do flaming damage, which ignites enemies. He has like I don't know what it's called, but like a disc basically that he summons, and that does damage. You can throw it and it like hits a number of enemies and then comes back to him, I believe. And I think in Age 4, like the mature version, it just hovers around him and deals damage, almost like a separate unit. Pretty cool, pretty cheap, but really hard to say just how effective he really is. Probably worth the investment. I really struggle at the moment to say whether or not he's that great. I've had him in my army a few times and I've noticed him, but I've not been like, oh hey, wow, that's good, or wow, that's powerful. He's kind of just there. So, probably worth picking up in your army. Kind of to be honest. But maybe I just haven't put enough time into utilizing him. Next up, from the hero's perspective, we have Zhang Xia, who basically has 2 auras. Now, his auras basically, you can switch between them. And his auras basically increase the amount of damage your myth units do, or decrease the amount of damage their myth units do. As an actual warrior, he's okay, honestly. Like, none of his stats are really that crazy. Like, he does somewhere in the region of 5 damage divine with a 5x multiplier. So it's not even like he does massive damage to myth units. But he's okay. Like I say, the aura itself isn't bad. Honestly, I think you could probably forego this guy and not notice much. But I don't think he's particularly expensive either. So in that regards, maybe not so bad. Alright, next up we have Wen Zhong. Now, Wen Zhong is extremely powerful. He is a mythic age hero. I think we have to put him somewhere in the region of here. Couple of reasons for that. The main reason, I think, is his crushing damage. So this guy does 72 damage crushing. I've seen this guy basically run into my base and level my walls whilst I've got an entire army pounding on the guy. I mean, he's an absolute tank, an absolute unit. Destroys buildings really effectively. Yeah, and I think he's got like a... Oh, he has the Fox Charm thing. So he's similar to the Sage, basically. He stuns an enemy and then creates a mirror image of it. That's what his thing is. On top of the fact that he's an absolute beast himself as a warrior. Just looking at his stats, 36 damage with a 4x multiplier versus Myth. So he's doing like almost 160 damage to Myth units per hit. Woof. That is some serious numberage right there. Yeah. Wenzhong, very good. Pick him up. Very powerful. You will not regret it. Next up, we have Yang Zhan. So Yang Zhan is another tier 4 Mythic Age hero. Yeah, this guy's pretty nuts. He is very much a Myth unit killer. I'd say even more so than this guy, if I'm being completely honest. I think we've got to put this guy here. Unfortunately, he's just nothing compared to these guys. Okay, so this guy basically can create a stag, a celestial stag that does damage. And it can shoot an energy projectile that deals 70 plus pierce damage, and then chain lightnings basically up to 10 other enemies. This thing can do 700 plus damage and a single attack. Kind of mental. Oh, and when it goes back to him, I believe it heals him as well for the damage dealt. It is actually insane. Like, fully insane. And the actual guy himself has an AoE attack. Also, he does basically the same amount of damage as this guy to Myth units, but with a 7x multiplier. This guy's doing like 300 damage per hit. Crazy. Absolutely crazy. So yeah, these heroes very, very, very strong. And the next one's no exception either, to be honest. So Li Jing is the next one. I mean, this guy's up there as well. And to be honest, this guy isn't necessarily a... It's not because of his damage that makes him so good. It's because of his ability, which is the Golden Pagoda. Basically, he can stun a group of enemies for like 5 seconds. I noticed this when I was doing one of the, I think, Divine Intervention, and the enemy kept sending Tiger Cavalry at me. And this guy would stun them, like stun lock them, stop them from moving for 5 seconds, whilst the archers just absolutely slaughtered their Tiger Cavalry. It was crazy. I was like, wow, this guy is absolutely nuts. So yeah, for that reason, another S tier hero. I have to be honest, I think the heroes that these guys have are insane. I'd say probably the best heroes in the game right now. Even when compared to like Hazers and even the Greek heroes, which are pretty damn good. Atlantean heroes are a little bit different, I suppose, in that pretty much any unit can become a hero. But as individual units, these heroes are very, very, very strong. Definitely worth building into your armies for sure. You will not regret it, I assure you. Alright, so moving on to the ships and the the sea myth units. So we've got the... I'm going to have to remember these names, apologies. They're not as straightforward as one might think. So you've got the Daojian, which is the arrow ship. Very powerful. I'd say they're pretty much on par with what you get from the other factions. I think we have to call them just a C tier. Because they're not really that much better than just a longboat or any other arrow ship from any of the other factions. However, there is one distinction, and that is, I believe it's Gong Gong, one of the gods that you can get, has a Maelstrom ability. In fact, it might even be one of the guys in tier 2 actually, or tier 3, probably tier 3. Basically, it's called Maelstrom. I don't really know much about it other than I used it once and was like, God damn, that's powerful. Basically, it creates a Maelstrom which does like an AoE damage in an area, and it like really messes with melee ships and like these Chiwens. I think it's these things, which are very powerful myth units. Really messes with the AI on them. So yeah, if you combine that with the Maelstrom God upgrade, very, very good. And that pushes them into like a B tier. But on their own, I'd say C tier. Very, very effective what they do. Next up, we've got the Meng Chong, which is the close quarters hammer ship. Again, not really much better than any of the other hammer ships in the game, or any of the other close quarter ships. Personally, I prefer range to melee. So I think the arrow ships, the Dongjongs, are better, or Dujans are better than the Mengchongs. But ultimately, I guess it comes down to preference. It's well worth, if you're building a ship army, to include all three of the ships. But I have to say, the Luchan, which is the siege ship, is very powerful. Very, very powerful indeed. Easily the best traditional ship that they have. Absolutely lays waste to buildings and docks. They're tanky, they're healthy. They're pretty good. I really like them. I've got a lot of time for them. They are my preference for C units. However, next up, we're talking about the myth units from the Chinese faction. And this is where I think the Chinese faction kind of stand out in some ways. They've got some extraordinarily powerful myth units. Starting with the Chiwen. So this unit basically has a regenerative shield. And it's a tanky shield as well. It's like 300, I believe. As well as being like a tanky unit anyway. So I think it's fair to say this is up there as being a pretty solid A tier unit. They are a little bit expensive, granted. But these things are very, very good. I think having like 2 or 3 of these in your army or your navy is very much worthwhile. Especially if you're in a sea battle. If obviously you're on a map without water, then there's no point, but... or with limited water, then no point, but... if you are locked in a sort of a naval engagement with an AI or an enemy, these things are a must. Just grab 1 or 2 of them, if nothing else, and they'll easily replace these Mengchongs, the hammer ships. And then just use the arrow ships and the siege ships to accommodate them, and jobs are good. Next up, we've got the Zanwu, which is basically a sea turtle with a snake on its back. They are amphibious, but they can also cross land. They're kind of like a siege unit. They do a decent amount of damage. and they are extremely durable. But they're also an Age 4 unit, myth unit. They're extremely expensive. And aside from the freebie that you get when you age up, honestly, I think you can probably avoid them. I believe they are part of Gong Gong's squad as a god. The god squad, if you will. But I don't... I say, aside from the one that you get free, I wouldn't even bother. But they are very good units in their own right. I mean, you'd have to say they're easily better than all of these units. I prefer these, if I'm being honest. These melee Chiwens. And I think they're a notch above them for the most part. But the benefit is these things can go and land as well. So the terracotta... It's not the army, I don't think they're called. Trying to remember what they're actually called. Yeah, I can't see it. It's the terracotta clay soldiers dudes. You get them right at the start of the game. They kind of get better with ages. They're kind of meh, to be honest. I mean, I'll put them bottom of a D tier. They have an expiration date. They're kind of good if you make a mistake. They'll help you recover if the enemy catches a villager or a bunch of villagers off guard. You can kind of send them to the TC. Use these guys just to bash them out quick and nice and early, and then just defend yourself. But they're not that great, to be honest. Yeah, they're worth grabbing if you make a mistake. They might save your bacon, but you definitely wouldn't build them into your army for sure. Next up, I believe these are called the Yatsa. Yatsa, I believe is how they pronounced it in the campaign. So these things have a dash attack. Kind of phase through walls, but they are pretty weak. In fact, as far as myth units go, they are pretty weak. I'd have to say they're not really much better than a C tier. But the fact that you can phase through walls is pretty cool. Yeah, you can kind of, as I say, phase between walls and other obstacles. And you can kind of use them to cause a little bit of chaos in the enemy's main base. And kill villagers, they're pretty effective at that. But they're not really a combat unit in the same way a lot of the other myth units are. So this next unit is the Fae, which is basically what is summoned when you use the Fae Beast's god power. These are an interesting unit because they're not really a unit so much as they're a god power. As far as god powers go, they're actually pretty damn good. I'm going to put them there because they're actually not that... They're not really that good as a myth unit. They don't do much damage. They don't really... They don't really attack. But what they do is they leave a trail of like poison on the floor. So when you summon them, basically you can send them around, they'll leave a trail of poison. And all the units around them take a ridiculous amount of poison damage. These things are definitely going to get nerfed in the future, almost guaranteed. Because the god power is basically broken because of them. But as an actual myth unit, you can't build them. It's all part of that god power. And it's not those as units themselves that are doing the damage. It's the dot damage and the poison damage that they spawn. So for that reason, it's hard for me to rank them anything above a C. But the actual god power itself, very, very powerful. Next up, we have the Quan Chi, which is used a lot in the campaign by the enemy. They can take to the sky or they can land. Either way, they're not that fantastic. I think B tier is kind of okay when you compare to what's below them, because they are significantly better than what's below. In fact, I might have to rearrange some of this. I think these guys are better than C. I think they are fair enough in B tier. But yeah, these units, Quan Chi, not bad, not particularly great. Slow attacks, but they do a decent amount of damage. But they're quite easy to kill. They're not very tanky. Yeah, I think that's about... They don't really have any special abilities other than the fact that they can fly. I think that's as good as I can... as high as I can place them, honestly. Next up, we've got the Chillin', which is basically an AoE healer. As damage dealers, they're not great. But as an AoE heal, very good. I think we have to put them here because of their AoE heal ability. You can get them in the second age. They're pretty cheap. And you definitely want to have one or two of these in your army if you can get them. Because the amount of healing these things can output, just by having them in your army, even if they're not fighting, is kind of nuts. Whether that be in like a combat engagement or after the fact, after the fight, you can move them in and just heal up the boys. I'm a big fan of them. I really like the Chillin'. Next up we have the... I believe this is the Tauti. So this is probably one of the main units the enemy uses in the campaign. I fought against these things a lot. They are pretty good. They are pretty good. But in the same token, they're not really that standout-ish. You kind of need a lot of them for them to be hugely effective. Again, they're kind of like they're definitely better than the Quan Chis. I don't think they're as good as the heroes, although arguably you can only have one heroes, whereas you can have 20 of these. Now 20 of these is going to be quite impactful. But they are relatively expensive for what they are. And on their own, they're not that good. In numbers, they're not bad. Yeah, I think that's reasonable. We do have the Bahu, which is basically a white tiger myth unit that is insanely powerful. Very tanky, huge DPS. Fast. They can stun. I really like these. I reckon they are one of the better myth units in this game. Definitely up there. They are a bit expensive, but I would take one of these over a White Horse Cavalry any day of the week. They're just really sturdy, high DPS, and they stun. And they dash. They're just on a really good all-round myth unit. I think one of the best myth units you can get in, like, tier 3, I think they are. So next up we have the Tawu. Now I can't actually remember if these are tier 3 or tier 4 myth units. They're tier 3. I would say these things are pretty much up there with the Bawu. The Bayou. I actually prefer the Bayou to the Tawu. But I also think the Tawu are really powerful. Now, I've had these things beat on a fortress and destroy it whilst getting slapped by numerous units. These things have such a high amount of health. They can charge through enemies. Their crushing damage is insane, so they really do hit like a truck when it comes to buildings. They are very powerful units. Personally, I prefer the Bawus, but the Tawus are... they're definitely up there. I think they're on par. They're just used in different ways. Alright, next up we have the Hundun. So these things can send units to the Void. Specifically human soldiers, I think, is what they typically send to the Void. I could be wrong on that. I haven't used them a huge amount, but I've had it happen to me quite a few times. Okay, yeah, so they can cause basically enemy units to run in fear. They can send humans and myth units to the Void and basically banish them for a time. These things are actually very powerful, I have to be honest. Even though I think I prefer the Bayous, the Hunduns don't have hit like a truck. They're extraordinarily tanky, a huge hit point pool. They do decent crushing damage as well to buildings, and they can banish units, both myth units and human soldiers. Are they S tier? They could be. They could be S tier. They're somewhere between an A tier and S tier. I think that would depend on your own experiences with Hunduns. Personally, I think they're A tier. But I could definitely see a case for them being like a low-end S tier unit. They are expensive and they have a high population cost. But Hundun's very good. Next up, we've got the Pixius, which is basically an improved trader. You can upgrade them so that they can... I think it's 20% of the gold can be brought in for wood and food as well. So if you're turning in 100 gold per trip, they also turn in 20 wood and 20 food as well as a bonus. Kinda nuts. As far as traders go, I mean, they're up there as being a good B tier unit for sure. Yeah, they're the best trader unit in the game by a mile. But again, they're trader units, so, you know, it's hard to put them any higher than that. Alright, next on we got the big three myth units. Certainly in terms of cost. And I have to say power as well. So, first up we got the Zuku. Which, I mean, I would call them Phoenix because they're quite similar in that regard. But these things are fiery birds. They do, they can reduce the armor of enemy units. Where do we put them? I think we have to put them S tier. There's no way they can be anywhere but. This is technically a gatherer. The Sage can... I mean, the Sage is just too good to... Yeah, I think here's fair. The Sage as a hero is just so damn good. So damn good. But as far as myth units go, they are one of the best. Genuinely one of the best S tier units. Myth units in the game. What makes them so good is A, they can reduce the enemy armor. I think they can increase your own armor as well. And they can create like these so they're called fiery tornadoes. Okay, sorry. So what it does is it I am mistaken with it. So it's fiery deflector. So basically it temporarily increases its own and nearby friendly units' armor rather than decreases enemies. So it's giving you a boost to armor. And it's basically creating fiery tornadoes on cooldown, which is... I assume 30 seconds. And it does a considerable amount of damage. Like, it burns down buildings, it burns down units. It's a pretty small aura, but it does a lot of damage. They're also very effective at taking down air units. They're kind of the counter to so if someone's going loads of Kwonglongs or are they called Yanglongs? Yinglongs, even. So these two dragons, basically. If someone's going loads of these dragons, the Zuki are kind of an answer. Obviously, the hero units are also an answer, including the pioneers. But yeah, you could also go Zuke to counter them. But yeah, very, very powerful S-tier myth units. Next up, you've got the Kwonglong, or Qinglong. So this is like an aquatic dragon. Its main attacks are kind of okay. But what makes these units absolutely insane is its AoE, like, whirlpool attack. It is on a cooldown, again, similar. It's probably somewhere in the region of 30 seconds. I wonder if it actually says on here. Every 20 seconds, yeah. It's called Aquatic Burst, basically, and it's like a, it's almost like a whirlpool, and it does a significant amount of AoE damage. Now, if you've got 3 or 4 of these, and they all cast that at once, oh my god, the amount of AoE damage it does. I mean, if you've got, I don't know, 50 archers, and you cast those 4 Kwonglongs, just cast Whirlpool and just retreat, your archers die, and then these things just escape, like, without even barely a scratch. It's so abusable. So abusable. Very, very good units. And they also have a myth unit technology that you can grab called Rising Tide, which is basically a I think that's what it's called. Basically, it's a veterancy thing you can gain. So as they gain combat experience, which it unlocks, basically they increase the damage it does, the amount of health it has. It's actually insane. Like, you get one of these, like, on the highest tier. Their whirlpools do broken amounts of damage. It's not even funny, actually, just how broken these units can be. But you do have to get there, and they are counterable with a bunch of pioneers. I mean, hero units absolutely destroy them. Sages melt them. Even the Zukis kind of melt them as well. So they are counterable, but they are really, really, really powerful units. And then the Yinglong is basically... I mean, it's basically like a Nidhogg. You can only get one of them unless you keep repeating the god power. These definitely deserve to be an S tier unit. But in the same token, Yeah, in the same token, they are... I would take a Zuke or a Qinglong over them any day of the week. But we can't deny the fact that they are probably S-tier units. They are very tanky. I mean, it's like a Nidhogg, right? Very different abilities, but they do like thunder, thunderstorms, these slow enemy units. They also have a thing that actually slows the gather rate of nearby farms as well, which is kind of funny. It's kind of an annoyance more than anything else, but yeah, they have some uses. Obviously, from a hit point pool perspective, they've got a hell of a lot. Yeah, 2,000 hit points these things have. And they do a decent chunk of divine damage too. So, yeah, very, very powerful myth units. I do think the Qinglong and the Zuke are better, which is why I've placed them as such. And obviously you can't just make them like you can normal myth units. They're part of a god power. A tier 4 mythic unit god power. So, yeah, that's kind of my tier list. I think the S tier units are borderline busted in many ways. The Tiger Cavalry is hella good. I think I do need to probably move that down a little bit. I think that kind of needs to go there. Hard to say with these things, just because it is such a powerful unit. I mean, it is, yeah, it's even a myth unit. It does damage to everything. You can upgrade them numerous times. Yeah, I think that's fair. You can only have one. You know what? I'm going to put them there, just because they're a gatherer. So yeah, I think that is my complete tier list for the Chinese faction. Pretty happy with what that looks like. We've got a good mix of heroes and myth units and normal units, gatherers. And hopefully I've done a relatively good job of explaining the reasons behind why I've put these units where I've put them. Naturally, I'd be very curious to hear what you guys think. Whether you think I'm bonkers or whether you think my suggestions and reasoning is on point. But yeah, something fun, something a little bit different for you guys. Naturally, if this is a video you guys enjoyed, then please do give it a thumbs up. If this is the kind of content you enjoy, then please do consider subscribing to the channel. It does help support the channel, would be greatly appreciated. Do let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. And as always, I shall see you in the next video.